Yeah.
Okay.
All right.
right.
We've got high chairs now.
Yes,
So
we've
sort of
come up in the world.
see you when
Yeah.
we sit down.
All right.
All right. All right. We haven't done this country where do you come from thing, so let's do that, shall we? So yell out a country. Obviously, Belgium's one of them. How many of you come from Belgium? So
yeah. One,
there you
two,
go.
3, 4, 5.
So have a look at each other, because you
7,
probably
8,
never
9.
met each other before, right? There you go. Belgium, okay. And then there's Netherlands.
Oh yeah, it's almost. Well, it's more than the Belgians, isn't it?
More than Belgians.
Yeah.
G'day. So there you go, all you guys.
Yeah.
Welcome. Germany.
Good contingent of Germans, isn't
Germany,
it?
there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah, Germany. Now, what other countries are represented? England?
How many from England? Yep. 3 of you. Yeah.
What?
I'm English, but I live in Spain.
Live in Spain, so Spain, from Spain. Yeah. Yeah. I get that.
Finland.
Finland? Yeah, Finland.
It's a big trek.
Big track.
Yeah, I'm from Suriname, that's a South American country, but I'm actually living for a year now in the Netherlands.
So where are you living? I didn't catch that.
Suriname.
Oh, you're living
But
in the
he's
Netherlands,
from
but you're actually from
Suriname.
That's
Suriname. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Nice.
France.
France, from France. G'day. Oh, Portugal, of course. Yeah. Well, that's what's left.
Malaysia.
Malaysia?
Yep.
Yep.
Do you live in Europe now, or did you come all the way from Malaysia?
No, before I lived in Japan,
Yep.
China, and
Yes.
now in France.
And now in France.
France.
Yeah. Yeah.
G'day.
Yeah.
I'm Indonesian American.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah. Risa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Malta.
Malta? Yeah.
Did you come from Malta? Do you live in Malta? Yeah. Yeah.
I used to live here.
Oh, cool. Welcome.
G'day. Okay.
Anywhere else?
Anywhere else?
Sweden. Yeah.
Sweden?
Swedish ladies.
Yeah. Denmark?
Denmark.
There you go.
Angoma.
In South Africa.
South Africa.
I live in Belgium.
Yeah. It's funny how people come from all over and finish meeting different places, isn't it?
Yeah.
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 When we ask you, where are you from? It's funny how we naturally think, oh, I'm from a place on Earth. Isn't it?
You didn't ask for the source.
Yeah. Can you see a part of our issue when we're trying to examine who we are, like where we come from, who we are, the majority of us are very much centred around our country of birth or country of origin. Can you see that? So here on Earth, that's a very common thing, isn't it? Because you're brought up and you're assimilating this world we're living in, this Earth that we're living in, the physical, you could say the physical part of the universe, in a manner that is focused on your senses and what you see. And remember, we raised this yesterday, didn't we, about the human soul and what you're really ignoring for the most part, the human soul, and focusing more on the fact that my physical self lives here in Belgium, or my physical self lives or comes from another country, Lithuania, Sweden, whatever. This is where what I feel is my country of origin. And it's really interesting because in every society, there is sort of almost a pride of your country of origin, isn't there? Where you feel like, I'm from this and I'm from that, and you identify with these countries.
And feel like we belong there, don't we?
Yeah, and
belong.
and there's your even the language you speak, of course, creates separation between yourself and a person from another country, doesn't it? Because as you know, when you go to another country and you don't speak their language, there's a whole heap of things going on. You've got no idea what's happening. And aside from anything you can observe with your eyes, you can't work it out until you learn the language. And so there's all these barriers here on earth that are constructed, and in a lot of ways purposefully constructed for you to live a very limited life. Right? And this has been going on for millennia, for thousands of years, this problem. And so we've all been brought up in this environment that is detuning us, steadily detuning us from feeling that we're brothers and sisters, and steadily detuning us from our actual origins, right? So the question then becomes, where do we really come from? Isn't it? Now, if we're just a physical being, then you do come from the country you were born in. But if you're not just a physical being and you actually have a soul, then where did that come from? Now, the reason why I sort of remind you of these things, because I know you've listened to videos before or whatever and heard about this before, but the reason why I'm reminding you is because unless you understand that there's a part of you, and by the way, it's the largest part of you, that isn't physical, in the sense that it isn't what you can see, touch, taste, but there's a part of you, and it's your, you could call it your real sense of yourself, who you are, comes from a location that's not of earth. So you know how you could really say that, you could say instead of all of that, you could really say you're earthlings, couldn't you?
Temporary earthlings.
And in a way, you're temporary earthlings, but the trouble is, a duck also comes from earth, so a duckling is actually an earthling as well. So ducklings are earthlings. Now, what's the difference between you and a duck? Well, I think it's quite obvious that there's a few differences physically.
Feathers, someone said.
Yeah. But it's interesting that we identify to a country rather than even to a group of people that are not of a country, isn't it? So that's interesting itself. Like a duck is a duck no matter where you go. But a human isn't a human no matter where you go, because you're from France or you're from Belgium or you're from Australia or from some country, and we identify like that. But the reality is we're not even earthlings. We're souls, human souls.
Is it true that your soul chooses a place to be born and you have to fulfill a certain purpose on that location?
No, it's not. Although that's the New Age philosophy, and it all sounds all good that you chose it, but the reality is there are many, many factors that determine where you're actually born on Earth. And those factors have a lot to do with your personality and nature and the needs of the society in which you're born into. And what from God's perspective, how that society is going to become more loving. So God's intention is that where you're born, you would, if you were your true self, you would aid that location to grow more in love towards some kind of development in love. But unfortunately, what happens is the imposition of society, family, education, and other things play a role in destroying that pure intention that would normally be there in your soul. And when I say intention, you are a blank soul when you arrive. And what I mean by that is that you are a person with a nature and a personality, but you don't know who you are. You haven't learnt about yourself yet. So the process of what we would call incarnating, so the very first time a person comes to Earth, is really the process of a soul splitting into two separate parts, and one part of the soul goes to is attracted to a body created for it, a spirit body and a material body that are both created at the time of conception. So, you know, with the union between the sperm and an egg cell, what actually happens there is there's two bodies getting created, not one. And both bodies are getting created at the same time. Both bodies have a genetic structure, and both bodies, the spiritual body is made of spiritual material that you can't actually see it, it's actually in a different dimensional space. And then there's a physical body which is created in the physical space. And those two bodies, your half of the soul is now attached to. So if I'm male and have masculine traits and tendencies, I will be attracted to a male body. And at this stage, my half of the soul isn't, before this occurs, I'm not an individual. I don't know who I am. I haven't become self-aware yet. But in this process, the very process of incarnating, which happens soon after conception, like within a day of conception, this process occurs, and now I'm beginning the process of becoming self-aware. Right? Now the problem is, and it's not a problem because God designed it to be the proper way of things happening, is that I've got to learn a lot of things. And it's not practical for me to learn everything all at once. It's impossible for somebody to learn everything all at once as soon as they incarnate. So what God has designed is a process of gradual growth, some of which is forced upon you. And when I say it's forced upon you, you're a little baby first, and then 2 years later you're a toddler, and 2 years later or 3 years later you're going off to school potentially, and 6 or 7 years later you've got your full development of your brain, and so you're able to assimilate and make decisions and so forth. And then during your puberty years, you're developing sexually as well. So you now start connecting to things like ideas and concepts like romance and desire and passion and love and all of these kind of things. And then once you enter sort of adult maturity, then you start connecting to ideas like having a family. And these things are all meant to challenge you. Well, not so much challenge you, but help you grow as a person in love. That's why God designed it that way. So your physical body is your very first port of call. It's your very first interface. The soul, your half of the soul, remember there's this other half that also has to go through a process too, a similar sort of process where it will be attracted to a body, right? And it will have a spirit body and a physical body created for it as well. And both halves are going through this process. So let's say that half is more attracted to the female, and so it's going to be attracted to a female body. And so now you've got one half of your soul. Your whole soul is one soul, but half of it is you. Half of it is each of you as individuals. And that half is in a process of discovery of its half self. But also, at some point, it's going to have to be in a process of discovery of its whole self. In other words, discovery of its other half as well. Some point, it's going to have to do that as well. God designed it that way. Now, for the majority of people on earth, there's hardly any awareness of that at all, right? And in fact, there's this whole concept that there's no half of yourself, you're just you, and you're an individual, and you've got to make your way in the world as an individual and so forth. That's the general philosophy here on earth, and that philosophy on earth has been here a long time with some exceptions. And when I say some exceptions, there's been some spiritual people in the past who haven't heard about God's love or God's truth. This was way before that was on offer, and they discovered they were half of a soul. So Socrates and Plato were two of those kind of people. They recognised that, there's more to me than just what I think I am, but there's this other half of me that I can feel some sort of connection to. And they started to recognise they did have another half, a connected half, somewhere else in the world. And they didn't know, of course, at that time how to discover that person or how to find them, or what kind of things in the soul, what kind of abilities or attributes of the soul would cause an attraction. But they they did understand they were there because they could feel them. So in history, it's been rare for a person to feel that way. Most people sort of feel quite insular and self-aware in the sense of their half. When I say self-aware, they're aware that they themselves are a conscious, thinking being, able to make choices, able to make decisions, able to live harmoniously or disharmoniously with its environment. They're able to make decisions and choices that affect the rest of their life. They're able to determine a future. So that they recognise that this is way beyond what an animal is capable of doing. Right? So we know we're not animals in the sense that our soul isn't the animal, because this soul is capable of this self-awareness that the animal body is not capable of having. So you could say the human form is really an animal body, but there's something inside of it, the real part of you, that is way beyond an animal in terms of its capacity and its understanding and its abilities. So this is sort of the structure of, you could say, of you. Now, you are one half. So if you're in a male body, then you're a half. Your half is masculinely inclined. And if you're in a female body, then your half is femininely inclined. Right? That's how it works. And that is determined by the attractions based upon the half of the soul at the time of incarnation. Make sense? You want to ask a question about that?
Yeah, both halves do not have to be incarnated at the same time, right?
No.
Well,
it's impossible for you to be incarnated at the same time, because you know, unless there's like two people having sex at exactly the same time, exactly. You know, and I suppose it's sort of possibly possible, but it's highly unlikely.
But did God meant to make sure that you meet or that it's possible to meet your soulmate on Earth?
Yeah, God designed this system right from the beginning that you would meet your soulmate on Earth.
But then He would give some people like 80 years to discover each other, and other people 5 years or 1 day, or.
Well, the problem is, as I said earlier, we've become so detuned from our soul and detuned from its attributes and its abilities and its qualities that we don't know how to find our soulmates anymore.
No, but does God have a plan with that? It's at least possible, or so it's.
Well, God designed it so it was possible.
Yeah.
And not only that, God wanted that you did meet your soulmate on Earth.
Okay, that was the.
God wants that to happen, okay. But the problem is most of us don't want it.
And if one of the halves is incarnated and the other half not yet, where? Well,
they always incarnate within a few years of each other generally. I think the longest I've ever seen a soulmate disparity be about 25 years, something about that vicinity. In all the 2,000 years I've been observing the process. So it's, you know, I'd say there might be people that have incarnated with a larger gap, I don't know, but I've never observed them. Yep. If we come down here. Thanks for our mic runners.
Do you need to be born in the same country?
Well, we can think about it. What happens generally is the very first half, whoever that is, it could be the male or the female, the very it could be one half. Now, I'm saying male or female here because about 90% on the average, well, it's about a bit less than that. There's about 91 or 2% of humans that incarnate are actually going to be heterosexual in nature. And then there's going to be around 10%, a bit less, about 8% of humans that incarnate are going to be homosexual in nature. And what I mean by that is that both halves of the soul will be more masculine, or both halves of the soul will be more feminine, and so therefore both halves will attract the same body, rather than one half attract a male body and the other half attract a female one. Right? And God's designed that for lots of different reasons, and one of the primary ones is so that there is a consciousness in the part of the heterosexual ones that having children is not your life. You see, and this is something that the majority of heterosexual soul couples are so addicted to, like, because they want to prove they're a mother or father, they want to have progeny. And so God's intention was that there were certain souls that would only experience parenting through the adoption or the assimilation of children from other couples, right? And so he wants you to see that the role of a parent is not blood related. You understand? As an act of love on your part to see this, right? So that there's other purposes too that as the reason why God created souls that actually are not heterosexual in nature, right? So and for the most part, historically, those souls have found life very difficult because the average soul on earth is heterosexual in nature. There's also been a lot of religious and just general societal opposition to homosexual relationships, and as a result of that, there's been a lot of antagonism that many people who are homosexual have had to experience, and this is very, very wrong. And God also wants to show you that having antagonism towards a group of people is actually a very unloving thing to do. You know, and if those people didn't exist, then you wouldn't be stretched to know that, would you? If everybody on earth was heterosexual, you'd be going, oh, this is just normal, and you're not challenged in any way about the concept of a relationship. But if some of them are homosexual, now those that are heterosexual are going to get some challenges they're going to have to deal with. And that's good. They needed that in order to become more loving. You follow?
But
Yep.
yeah.
If we go up the back there, yep. Keep your hand up, sir.
I had a question regarding that incarnation part.
Yep.
Is beside location, is also the religion or the culture that you come into, is that also part of it, the plan?
Exactly. Every new soul that comes into a culture or a faith or a family structure, that new soul, God's intention is that new soul would stretch that culture or family structure in love in some way. That's the intention. But the trouble is most parents mould the child into their unloving ways. And so while God's intention is a loving direction, most parents have an intention of moulding the child into an unloving direction, unfortunately, moulding them into being mini-me's. You know, mini the same as me, many ideas the same as mine, and so forth. Oftentimes that's the case. So unfortunately, God's intention for our progress as humanity is often lost on us because of our own injuries and our own beliefs and our own structures of belief that are not just religious in nature, they're also societal in nature and economic in nature, and all of these other belief structures that we have a tendency to mould the child and restrict the child. And many of you would know you've experienced some of this in your own life, where you've been moulded and restricted by society, by constructs, into being a certain person. And now when you look at yourself, you're saying, who am I? Like, what am I meant to do? What's my life meant to be? Because this doesn't feel like what it meant to be. So, because, you know, for many people on earth, they're unhappy, they have no direction, there's no goals, there's no loving purpose for their future. They don't really see a future. They just see living out their life until they pass. Or if they do believe in a future, they sort of believe, my purpose is just to have a family, and then what happens after that? You have your family, they all leave, and now I'm a grandmother or a grandfather, and then after that happens, then, you know, I die. So does that sound to you like a very intelligent purpose for life? Because isn't that exactly what an animal does? Of course it is. So God's intention was that we have a much greater expansive life than this. But for us to learn to have an expansive life, when people are incarnating, they must challenge the system. You know what I mean? The system that's already there has to be challenged in some way by these new people. But unfortunately, frequently the new people get conformed rather than the new people challenging the people who try to get conformity. So in other words, the new people are being moulded rather than the people who are welcoming these new people into society, these children into society, allowing them to mould the adult, allowing them to see the adult needs to make loving changes, you see?
And it's not to say, though, that you should give authority to your children in your family, because...
That's not what I'm suggesting. We'll talk about that a bit later, maybe.
Yeah, and perhaps I could just mention something about will.
Yep.
So, of course, when we're born, we've got this, or when we incarnate, we've got this pristine kind of nature that God has given us, but we have no experience of the exercise of our will. We don't understand that we have a will that can be used either in a loving direction or an unloving direction for our desires, for our addictions. We don't understand that. And so there's a common misconception that children are perfect when they're born, but actually children
blank perfect.
They have the potential for that, but they don't yet understand the use of will. And so God's purpose in our incarnation is that we incarnate, and then we learn through the operation of her laws that how to express our personality and nature, which is unique to our whole soul, in harmony with love, in harmony with passion and desire that's loving. And this is how those challenges happen in the family that Jesus is talking about. When your child is given that freedom, then they will naturally trigger things within yourself that are unloving. But the issue we see a lot is that either children's will is completely suppressed or completely empowered without any education in love. And that's really, that's what we're doing.
Which is very damaging, very damaging to the child and to society, of course.
Yeah, a question
let's
about
get some
that,
questions.
yeah.
So down here first, and then...
At the back maybe
and then
first.
Up the back,
Vega, just to, is it Myrtle, I want to say?
Myrtle, yeah. And then down here,
Elsa.
Elsa, just down...
To the lady in the stripy shirt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No.
Just keep your hand up.
No,
Yep.
this one,
yes.
yeah.
Sorry, I've forgotten your name. Yeah.
No, come here. I can't see it.
Okay. I can't see which person you're pointing to. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. So at the back.
Yeah. So when the soul incarnates, I think it was at conception.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Does it matter? Now, where does the self-awareness begin?
At conception.
At conception.
Yep.
And does it matter what the impressions are from conception and pregnancy and birth
it does.
after?
Of course, it has a big effect on the experiences of the child.
And can it be that in those early moments your will gets shut down and
it'll begin to
experience love and it's lonely and cold and
let's say the mum and dad want to abort the child.
Yeah.
You imagine how that child now feels, because it's absorbing those feelings.
Yeah, but does it forget where it came from, or
it doesn't know where it's come from. It has no self-awareness.
It has no self-awareness.
That experience
the
in
self-awareness
the womb
began at conception.
Yeah.
Not before then.
Yeah.
So there's many souls yet to incarnate, and none of them have any self-awareness. And when you're a celestial spirit, or even in the union state, you actually get to see the actual soul. Mm-hmm. In the celestial state, you can see it with your spiritual senses, but you can't yet see it with your eyes, right? But in the soul union state, you can actually see those souls because you're in the same state now as they are. And you can see there's a whole, billions, almost from what I have observed, an infinite number of souls yet to incarnate. And they're all incarnating onto different planets and not just onto this one. And there are a few planets around the universe which are used for the process of incarnation at the moment. And when I say a few, I think God's intention in the future is for there to be many more. But at the moment, there's a few. There's some planets getting still prepared for human, you could say colonisation, I suppose. Not a good word, but for human use.
Poor choice of words on our part today.
But the reality is there is billions of unincarnated souls who are not yet self-aware, and they are not yet individualised. They don't know who they are yet. Mm-hmm. The process of incarnation which occurs, as I said, between that first 24 hours of conception. And that process is now immediately, you could say, you're individualised now. From now on, every experience you have is a learning one. So that starts in the womb, right? And this is well known, of course, now, isn't it? In the sense that you can educate your child while it's in the womb. You can play it music and do all sorts of things. You can love the child in the womb. And it's well known that the child is responding, right? And it's the soul of the child in particular that is responding. And the physical effects of that is the child moves around, or, you know, whatever happens in the physical body, you know, as a result of the child responding in their soul. But the reality is our children are educated, whether we like it or not, or whether we actually have done it formally or not, our children are educated from the moment of conception.
So there can be large differences for everyone. So
Large.
Differences in that experience.
Yeah,
yeah, the
very.
experience can be very welcoming and loving,
Yes.
and it can be hell.
Yes, yes.
So-
And for some child it's so hellish they self-abort.
Yeah.
So they miscarriage.
but-
What we call a miscarriage is the child doesn't want to be there
Doesn't
anymore.
want to be here.
Yeah.
But does it determine your start in the growth of love?
It does a lot, because you imagine if you haven't had much. Let's say you're a child who's just been incarnated and you're now in the womb, and then you find that your parents don't want you and they just choose to have an abortion, and you're unwanted. Now you're only 3 months conceived, or 2 months conceived. You've only had 2 months of life on earth and you're unwanted in that entire time. And then they do go ahead with the abortion, and then you're left as a spirit body only. And there's these beautiful, loving spirits who take these children and care for them until they become adults. But they haven't had any experience of life on earth, or any experience of adolescence or growing in love, or any of these things by the time they arrive in the spirit world. So they're very, very undeveloped. And there's a whole lot of education they need to receive that is way beyond the education you'll need to receive when you pass, because you've had those experiences. So yes, there's a huge effect on the experience of the child, even while it's in the womb, and what's going to happen thereafter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
And for every one of us, it's been different, right?
And what determines if you're born in in hell or or in a loving situation?
The parents
parents.
determine that.
Yeah.
So you're attracted to
This is the responsibility of being a parent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, if the average parent knew that, they might take their job more seriously, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not God's design that you experience hell in the womb. That's the
No.
choice of people to choose sin
People are
that
choosing
creates that.
You have free will. You're allowed to have sex whenever you want.
Yeah. Yeah.
God has no control over when you have sex. However, you do know when you have sex that you might have a child. So that's your responsibility. The environment you create for that child is also your responsibility. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Yep.
And the child
I
is
know you think that's unfair, which is really what you're trying to say.
Yeah, maybe.
So just say that.
it feels crap, doesn't
unfair.
it? Yeah. Yeah.
That's unfair.
Yeah.
Yeah, but can I ask something personal?
Sure.
Okay. My parents were heroin addicts
Yep.
when I was born. In the pregnancy, and I think in conception too, but I'm not sure.
Yep.
So I don't know if that's the truth, but I remember getting sucked into something really dark when my mother used heroin.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So that's
That's true.
and that's so scary and so terrifying and.
Yep. And you also had some nice spirit friends who were trying to help you in those places too.
I guess because I was protected.
You were. Yeah, but see, this is things we're unaware of oftentimes.
Yeah, but there's so much unawareness.
Yep.
Where so when you wish to experience the terror because you know you have to go through it.
Yep.
I can't reach it.
You will be able to.
Yeah.
Yeah, but with help from
No, you'll be able to do it for yourself.
Yeah.
How?
Well, at
see,
the moment,
this is the problem. This is what's happening with many of your questions. Your emotions, your individual emotions, drive many of your questions. Isn't that true?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in this case, it's quite obvious what emotion is driving the question. So I'm stating to you a truth of what happens at incarnation, and you're going, but that's so unfair for me.
No, I try to understand.
I'm not ridiculing
no.
the situation
It's
here.
like you are just angry. It's an injustice. It was
You feel
horrible.
it's an injustice.
And you're allowed to feel angry about
But
that.
it's not God who created the injustice.
Yeah.
No,
It's your mum and dad.
Yeah.
And if you let yourself feel that, you will be able to access the fear and any grief that you have about the situation.
The compassion,
If you let yourself have
yourself.
compassion for
Yeah.
yourself,
Yeah.
and you let yourself feel the truth that your mum and dad created this very bad environment for you, and you let yourself go through that emotionally, then you'll access these emotions easy enough.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, in my life, I've been tortured more than once, and sometimes for days on end, right? And people, which is not dissimilar to the kind of feeling your little self
Went through.
went through as in terms of the spirit work. But the reality is you also had some very loving spirits who took care of you in those moments and protected you from a lot of what was going on in spirit form. They couldn't protect your physical body, of course.
Yeah.
Right? Because that was up to your mum and dad to do. And whenever they took heroin or whatever, then of course they're not doing it. Yeah. And they're causing damage to you. And if you were breastfed while you were,
Yeah, I was.
while they're taking heroin, that's even worse, right? Because now you're receiving some of the drug, and therefore there's influences there as well, which make your life difficult. And these kind of things are the direct result of parents being unloving.
So I have to get angry.
Well,
You don't have to be
just
angry.
need to feel the truth that they were unloving, and you were this unfortunate. You had incarnated into their life to get them to be more loving. That's basically God's intention
That's
for
what
all
I
incarnation.
think I felt, yeah.
Yeah, but the environment is a very unloving environment that you're going into. Now, of course, they had their own reasons for why they are addicts.
Yeah.
And they probably had their own experience with their own parents as why
Yeah.
they're addicts.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean? And there's a long chain of these societal problems that have been occurring year after year, century after century, millennia after millennia, and it all results from us all choosing to be unloving at some point. Right? And this is why we need to solve it. Part of solving it is educating everyone about what happens, the facts of what happens. Unfair or not, these are the facts of what happens. And if we're educated as a society, you imagine if every parent who ever was thinking of becoming a parent knew that at the moment of conception, a little child is incarnated and they now have the responsibility to train and educate that child in love. Do you think a lot of the things that are going on now with regard to the education of children would be happening? They wouldn't be, would they, if everybody knew that? But the problem is, most of us want to ignore reality but allow for illusion. We want to live the illusion because then we can get away with a lot of things. And this is a problem that we face as a society. We are not learning love very fast. Now, we are learning it, but it's like takes centuries. You think about the Dark Ages of there's 1,000 years went past there where they were torturing people and abusing people in the name of religion. And my God, why did it take 1,000 years to work that out? That's wrong. Like I said earlier, homosexual souls have been treated bad ever since I've known, every homosexual soul I have ever met has been generally treated bad. One of my best friends, John, the Apostle John, he's a homosexual soul, and he was treated bad in the first century all the time. Now, why haven't we learnt? It's been millennia. where there's been like up to nearly 10% of all people ever incarnating have been homosexual, and yet it's taken us thousands of years, and still today there's countries like Russia and other countries like that still saying we're going to ban homosexuality. There's even in some like democratic countries, they don't recognise homosexual marriages. What's going on? It's because we don't learn love very fast. We don't learn what a loving thing would be very rapidly. But if we know the truth about things, then there's a higher likelihood that education will help us in our development of love. And what I'm suggesting to you is that the education you're going to need to go through is that you're allowed to say, my mum and dad were rotten to me, because they were. And they did bad things to me and it affected my life. And you're allowed to grieve it. You're allowed to have that grief. And if society was more loving thousands of years ago, it probably would have never happened to you. Because by the time we arrived at our day, all of us would be living in a paradise, wonderful condition where new children are welcomed on the earth, and none of them have ever got parents who are drug addicts, and none of them have ever got parents who are alcoholics, and none of them have got parents that smoke or do unloving things to other people. No one ever goes to war, and no one ever, these kind of things we can solve, but they are our creations. They're not God's. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
And I think something that I noticed for yourself and many people actually yesterday, there's this grapple with the intellect to understand, well, how could this be?
Yep.
And then there's the anger of like, that's so unjust. And really those two mechanisms, the intellect and the anger are the ways that we've learned in our flesh suits, like Jesus was talking about yesterday with our senses, to kind of stay away from the soul feelings. And as you pointed out, you have some feeling of the soul feelings of what you went through in that state, but there's this resistance to just grieving and softening, and so you go back to the intellect. How could it be? Oh, angry, it's not like that for other people, and these are just, it's coming to terms with the fact that these are the things that we use to stay away from the soul experience.
Yeah. And you got to be careful of misplacing your anger.
Yeah.
Your anger, when it's directed at God, is directed at the most innocent party to all of what happened to you.
Yeah.
Like, God only wants loving things for you.
Yeah.
And so when you direct anger at God for creating a system like this, for example, you're actually directing anger at the most innocent party. Yeah. And then the parties that are actually responsible, which is not just your mum and dad, but also the society that allowed your mum and dad even to, why wasn't you taken away from them right from birth?
Yeah.
Like a society that allows drug addicts to have children and then says, oh, the family relationship is more important than the welfare of the child, that society's got problems. That makes sense. Because, and we're so focused in this society of making family sacrosanct. In other words, family is holy. And in doing that, we overlook so many bad things going on in families. We overlook, abuse of women in particular in family arrangements, husband abuse of women. We overlook the abuse of children. We overlook the lack of care of a child. We overlook the lack of education of a child. We overlook so many things because we go, but it's the mum's responsibility. Well, if the mum is proving or the dad is proving that they don't love the child, then it's society's responsibility to do something about that. But you see, none of us really believe that, because how would you like it to be society saying to you, I'm taking away your child because you're being unloving? The majority of people go, that would make me very angry, so I'm not going to do it to anybody else. And so we have a lot of emotional problems as to why we're not loving as a society. And that's very unfortunate, because what happens is you end up with children who have lived a life like you lived in the first few years of your life, which is completely unnecessary. Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah. Do you want to go? This lady had her hand up.
Now, if we go, is it on the same subject? Yep. Let's ask that one first. Yep, sorry.
Yeah, I can feel this anger towards God, like
Yep.
a projection. Like it's really my parents that were unloving.
Yep.
It's very strong, you know, like really, really angry
Yeah.
with God. And last night I kind of let it go a bit, and I just directed it at God.
Yeah.
And it sort of felt like he can take it, she can take it, kind of thing.
Well,
And it felt
he
helpful,
feels
but like,
compassion
even
for
though
you,
it's
yeah?
misplaced somehow, like it's like a layer that I need to
Go through.
kind of go through. And
Yeah.
does that sound like
Yeah, no,
true?
that's
Like,
very
it's
true.
okay
Like,
to
I'm
do
not
that?
saying if you have anger towards God, you know, should be directing at mum and dad. I'm saying your anger towards God is misplaced, but if you have it, you need to feel through it, but stop acting upon it. See, the majority of us don't feel through it and we end up acting upon it. So in other words, we close down the potentiality of a relationship with God because we're so angry with him, right? Not really understanding that actually who we're really angry with is mum and dad, and we just don't feel we're able to be.
Yeah, so that acting upon it has been kind of like a giving up on life, you know.
Yeah.
Giving up on love, giving up too on the reality of God's existence. Most people do that. Most people go so far as to go, there is no God. If there was a God, I would have got treated better. You know, they even go so far as to now go into disbelief completely, go into complete lack of faith that even God doesn't exist anymore to them. So most of us are willing, because we're so avoiding of emotion, we are so willing to just use our mind to take us on this direction, which is anti our own loving development, into a place where we get very dark and very resistive of love. And so we end up, you know, being like ultra critical of relationships and everything as a part of all that. And this just keeps progressing and progressing if we're not careful. So the key is to stop and go, yeah, I've got anger with God, but, which probably also indicates you to believe God's existence at least, right? But you've got anger with God. I need to go through it and come out the other side so I'm free of this anger with God, and also so that I actually know who I'm really angry with. There is a very strong tendency in humans to be angry with the persons who are not going to react badly, but be conciliatory towards persons who will be violent. So what we have a tendency to do with God, because God's the least violent, is we blame him for everything. And the people who are actually violent, who treated us badly, we barely blame them for anything, which when you think about it, doesn't make any sense. You know, they're responsible because of their violence, but we are blaming God for them.
Yeah, so as I was doing this last night, very quickly my parents came as, you know, part of the story. And, So, yeah, it was very helpful.
Yeah, that's the way to go. Go through, you need to go through those experiences emotionally. Yep.
So I have two questions. So when one half of the soul is incarnated,
Yep.
and if that half is experiencing, for example, very hard experiences, it's born into a family that is unloving.
Yep. By the way, all of you have been born into families that are unloving. To be born into a loving family, you'd have to be born by celestial parents. But so this, it's just what the degrees of unloving are, isn't it, really, at the end of the day? But go on.
So if there is a lot of unlovingness,
Yep.
does it affect the other half of the soul that is yet to be incarnated, or if they have already incarnated?
If they are yet to incarnate, the answer to that question is no, because the other half is yet to begin the process of individualization and self-awareness. So, but as soon as it incarnates, these two are connected. And you don't realize it, but there is a cord actually, and most spirits who are in low conditions don't understand this. But there's spirits in the higher spheres, in the celestial spheres. You can see the cord that joins the two halves. You can trace it from one to the other. So if I want to find your soulmate, if I can follow the cord, it's a pink rose-coloured cord that goes between you and the other half. And that cord is a pathway of feelings. So yes, if you're having feelings and the other half of you as incarnated, they may finish up sharing some of those feelings. And this is done by design so that you can eventually join, so you can understand each other's life. Does that make sense? It's a practical and loving thing God has done so that you can understand the other half of you even before you meet the other half of you, if you're sensitive enough. Yep.
And is it that it's designed so that the two halves will help each other heal eventually? Because maybe because they have complementary wounds or injuries?
Oh, well, that's not always the case, because remember, they're also having their own life in their own family construct. So, you know, sometimes your wounds can be complementary, but other times they can be completely like opposite. You know, so
yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah.
So
well, yeah, sometimes the
complementary would be one assisting the other, right? But sometimes they can be, both of them have the same injury and they're not assisting the other. And, yeah.
So they actually give each other the hardest time when they meet. So
they can, yes. Yeah, and they can also, I've also seen ones meet and they've got so many injuries that are identical that they're so bound to each other in their codependence for their injuries that they never even have a soulmate relationship, because they're just bound together in their injuries. So an example of that is, let's say you've been born into a family who feels the man is the most important person in the family, right? And let's say your soulmate has been born into a family, he's male though, and he's born into a family and he thinks the man is the most important person in the family. When you and he eventually find each other, you're going, we both think the man is the most important person in the family. So who's going to get neglected in this relationship? You, right? Yeah. In the woman. And in that process, you may do that your entire life and you might be very happy. You might never have an argument even, because you feel that the man is the most important person. So when he tells you to jump, you jump. And when he says how high, you say, this is how high I'm going to jump. And you do whatever it is he wants, and you think you're being a good wife and he thinks you're being a good wife, and you get the reward of feeling like you're a good wife and he gives you the reward of feeling like you're a good wife. And when he wants sex, you give him sex, because that's the man's the most important thing, and it doesn't matter how you feel about it, and he thinks you're wonderful for doing it, and you get that reward. And so this codependent develops, and you might stay in that relationship your entire life on earth, but it's very unloving. Right.
And no one's being
and no
that
one's
unique
recognizing
personality. They're not, the two halves in that case are not expressing that personality that's been created. They're expressing the injury that's been put into them.
So the answer to your question is, sometimes the injuries are complementary. There is a definite link between the two halves, so each half can feel the other if they choose to.
Most of the time they're not feeling themselves.
Most of the time they're not even feeling themselves by the time they're an adult.
Yeah.
And so, of course, you can't really feel the other half if you can't feel yourself. But as children, that is particularly the case, where if they're young, very young children, babies and so forth, let's say they've incarnated within the first few years of each other, and at that point they are the most connected, and then usually society beats it out of them, the connection. Yeah.
And another question was about physical traits.
Yep.
So you said that first the physical body and the spirit body are created, and then the soul comes in? Yeah,
well, you remember the creation of these bodies is genetic in process. So it's about the commingling of the genes that come from the mother and the father, and that commingling of those genes determines the genetic structure of the body and the genetic structure of the spirit body as well. So those bodies are determined by genetic structure. This is not determined by genetic structure at all. So the soul is God's creation. You are a direct child of God as a soul, and that soul is perfect in its nature, and that soul can influence those bodies, or it can slowly detune from itself to the point where it hardly has any influence, hardly has any positive influence over the body, only negative influence over the body.
And the characteristics, for example, of our face, does it reflect the soul characteristics?
It can come to, the more the soul influences the development of the bodies, but at the beginning for most people it doesn't. The genes determine.
Because the two halves of the soul can look very different also.
Yeah, yes, they can look very different, but eventually they start to look the same. Depends how close they come to each other.
And how much they're expressing
and how much
soul.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Physiologically, they come to look the same, yeah. It's just a process that happens over time, mostly because the soul is progressing, particularly if it's progressing in love, and this usually happens after the celestial heavens. They're progressing so much in love and they're getting closer and closer and closer together that there's a merging of the feelings and emotions. And in fact, what eventually happens emotionally is the feelings that pass through one instantly also pass through the other. And so you end up with the same feelings, the same thoughts, the same... And eventually, you remember, the whole purpose is to be unified but aware. So God created the individual soul unified but unaware. And the purpose is for you to become unified and aware. And of course, the ability to do that is governed by the reception of love as well, because there's certain things that are required by the two halves of the soul to enter that unified state that only God's love can supply. So this is why there's technical reasons why you should love God, not just emotional ones. Because at the end of the day, the technical reason is you're never going to able to become a unified soul without God's love. God's designed it that way as well. And there's many reasons why, which we probably won't have time to go into today, because there's a lot of other things I want to talk about today.
Yeah, we're kind of going down the soulmate rabbit hole, aren't we?
And then, yeah.
Do the two souls always incarnate in a physical proximity, or
usually? Yes. So let's say, you incarnated. Let's say you were the first. So let's say in your case, the female part of the soul was the first, and there's even reasons why that might be the case. There are sometimes reasons that are related to attraction with regard to the people around the soul, the mother and father who are wanting to have a child. But there's also attractions around things like your personality and nature might be, you might have a bit more what I would call forward spirit than the other half has. And so you incarnate first, if that's the case. So let's say you incarnate first. The other half of the soul actually follows you around, right? Now, you're a baby, of course, and you don't know this is happening, but the other half of the soul stays close to you, looking for opportunities, and it's not a conscious thing. It's an instinctual thing to look for opportunities to incarnate near you. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And so if it can, it does. But if it finds that there's a time that goes past and there's nobody having children around then it goes further afield and further afield and further afield until it can incarnate.
There's lots of laws governing it. So it's not just any person having a baby nearby, obviously. It's also based on the personality of the parents and the personality of the child and how that child may trigger that parent, into more loving condition. There's a lot of factors involved with the laws, and it's impossible to describe them all in an afternoon with you guys. So, but everyone has just basically got the question, is this person my soulmate? Basically, that's what everyone's asking in a roundabout way. Was it that person, or might I find them here, or where should I look? Or,
yeah. And I'm thinking, in my case, my children were born in Japan, and then I moved very quickly. Yeah. So I'm wondering, am I distancing them from their soulmates?
Yeah.
Potentially, yeah.
Potentially, but you see, remember the two halves follow each other around at some point too. So let's say you had a male child and he happened to be the one that was born first, and then you moved. Well, if the female part of his soul had not yet incarnated, then she would move along with him. And so let's say you arrived in, say, where are you now?
Amsterdam.
Amsterdam, yeah. So let's say you move from Japan to Amsterdam, and he would end up being Dutch. Right. Well, you know, she, the one who's following your son around, if he hadn't incarnated yet, she'd be Dutch. Yeah. So he'd be born in Japan. She'd be born in Holland. Right?
But you know what the biggest factor determining whether you meet your soulmate or not, or whether your children meet their soulmate, is the loving expression of your personality on earth.
Exactly.
That is the most attractive thing to your soulmate.
Yeah.
Express yourself lovingly, your true nature and personality, and especially in this day and age where everyone's moving. Look at all of you. You were born here, lived there, going there. You know, everyone's living everywhere and moving around. God's laws have designed it that soulmates will meet when they have that loving expression. And sometimes you meet even before you do, but you just don't recognize each other.
A lot of times.
Yeah. So if you are expressing your personality, you're growing in love, and you are desiring your soulmate, you're bound to recognize them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Else, sorry.
What would happen if my soulmate had died already while I'm still on Earth?
Well, that's a good question, because the reality is nearly 200 million soulmates die every year. Over 130 or 40 million of those are abortions, and another 60 or 70 million of those are miscarriages. And so that's a lot, isn't it, if you think about it? So yes, can be a likelihood, and there is a likelihood for many people because of the amount of abortions and miscarriages. And also many children on Earth. There's 50 million of children on Earth that die before the age of 5. Still, unfortunately. So if you look at all that, that's 250 million children almost dying every single year. We're not a very developed society allowing this to happen, but that's a lot of soulmates who are not going to meet their soulmates until they pass, isn't it? Now, when I say meet, you might not meet, if your soulmate has passed, you might not meet the soulmate until you pass, but they'll probably meet you way before then. You know, they'll know who you are way before then. Children who pass generally progress very rapidly in the spirit world for lots of reasons. They don't have all the impediments of sin that we generally have. So what happens is they get assisted to progress, and they start progressing, and it's very rapidly. Most children, they might take, the average person on Earth takes 200 years to get the 5th sphere, probably. The average child would take about 50 years at the most to get to that location. There's some that take longer, but it's unlikely. And so by the time, say you were both incarnated, something happened to them, like they were aborted or they were miscarried, or something happened in their childhood and they died, and then so say within 50 years, so before your own death, they already know who you are.
Yeah.
Right? So do you think they're going, I'll just stay away from her or him? And it's not like that, right? They're going, very interested in your life. And it's interesting when we feel this spiritually, because quite often people go, I've got I think it's a guide with me or a guardian with me. And I'm going, it's not your guide or guardian, it's your soulmate. But you can't really say much about it sometimes. But, because a lot of times the soulmate takes a deep interest in their other half, of course, and they want to be their guide and their guardian. And oftentimes soulmates welcome their soulmates in the spirit world when they pass under those circumstances. So while it might seem like bad initially, it can also turn out in the future that you meet your soulmate straight away as soon as you pass, which, by the way, most people on Earth don't. That doesn't happen to most people on Earth. What happens to most people on Earth is they're so detuned from their soul qualities and attributes that it takes them nearly 100 years before they even develop them, and another 100 before they meet their soulmate. Yeah. And there's plenty of spirits I know that haven't met their soulmate in 2,000 years. Yeah. So, what can sometimes seem like a disadvantage, looking at it from a human perspective, sometimes it can turn into a great advantage in your spirit life. Yep. An example of that is if you're very poor on earth. See, people who are very poor on earth generally don't have a lot of expectations. They don't have a lot of demands. They don't generally boss people around very much. They don't see themselves as better than others generally. And so on earth it might seem that they have a poor life and a difficult life, but as soon as they pass, they're already in a better condition than the majority of people on earth are.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, you know, most rich people on earth can spend thousands of years in the hells after they've passed. And yet many poor people on earth might only spend a few years there and then they move on very quickly.
And it's like the opposite on earth. Like people would think that, like humans would think that rich people are better than
That's right.
poor people.
That's right. So, you know, quite often what seems to be a disadvantage on earth turns into being an advantage in your next life.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is great, really, when you think about it, isn't it? Because imagine if you were disadvantaged here and then you were also disadvantaged there. That would be terrible.
Yeah.
So yeah, lets people. Oftentimes it's only after you pass that you realise how wonderful what God has done is. You know, because what seems to often be a disadvantage on earth often turns into an advantage in your spirit life, and your spirit life is much, much longer than the life you have on earth. Much longer. You know, of course, because you might, you know, I know spirits that are 150,000 years old.
God.
Yeah. You know the Bible character, the angel Gabriel? Yeah? Those of you who are religious? He's 150,000 years old.
Cool.
Yeah, he lived on earth 150,000 years ago. And he's watched, you can imagine, thousands of generations of people and life on earth, and he's seen everything. And, you know, I first met him when I was in the first century, and he became one of my guides, right? And I got to talk to him every day, right? Imagine that, talking to a person who's 150,000 years old, being able to talk to them every day about their experiences and their life and so he is a great friend of mine, yeah? And that's why he's still one of our guides. Yeah. Okay, Franz, and then up the back.
Dylan, I'm just going to remind you to drink.
Yeah. I've got to remind myself to drink. Yesterday I was so dehydrated.
Just on the last point you mentioned, it must have been totally amazing for him to accompany you in your development and even to learn from you how to absorb God's love.
Yeah, it was. But it was also beneficial for me. You see, a lot of our relationships are like that, aren't they? It's like you meet a person, they can help you, you can help them. It's not, you know, it's not all like one-way street, is it? This is the beautiful thing about love. If somebody loves you, they're going to have some benefit to your life at some point. And if you love them, you're going to have some benefit
Yes.
to their life at some point too. Yeah? That's how it works, which is great.
Hey, I'm just wondering, should we have a short break? And, well, we don't have to. Just remembering everyone's questions.
Well, no, I want to. How are you with the toilet?
Good.
No, good. And I just want to make sure that, because we hardly have progress beyond upon what actually happened right at the time you got conceived, right? Because you ducklings, I mean you earthling, well, not even your earthlings, because you're not that either. But this is how you came about, which is really important to understand. Yep. So have we got any questions about that process? Because we want to focus back on that process. Yeah? You good? So up the back over there, right at the back, thank you. And down at Mia, down the front, thanks.
When you know who is your soulmate, when is it the right time to tell him or her?
When's the right time to...
To tell him.
To tell them,
To
when you
tell
know.
Tell them.
Many a folly, hasn't there been?
Many a folly has been committed by this process of telling them. Firstly, it must be said that unless your development is of like a fifth sphere spirit in love, it's highly unlikely you know who your soulmate is. So
for sure, yeah. Yeah.
So the majority of persons on earth have a feeling that person my soulmate, and what they do then is they target them very unlovingly, badgering them and pushing them until the person agrees. But that's not going to help your soul, because for your soul to join, the two halves must independently come to their own assessments. Independently. So you telling your soulmate or not, and particularly if your development in love is quite poor, you're telling your soulmate who they are. It's highly unlikely the person you've selected is your soulmate for a start. And then let's say on the off chance they are your soulmate, you are now like quite strongly affecting their life, manipulating in fact their life if you're not careful, just to meet your own desires, which is a very unloving act to commit. So you need to be very circumspect about telling your soulmate about who they are. So when I met Mary in both centuries, I didn't do that. I knew who she was, but I didn't tell her. First century or now, right?
I think you need to look at your motivation for telling someone that they're your soulmate.
Yeah.
Like, I do understand
pure?
that it would probably be exciting, or, you know, if you feel like I've found them finally, but you have to be very humble in that process about, am I in an addiction?
Yeah. Mary said it's very exciting and you found them finally, but that's not how you actually feel. How I felt was, now I know.
Relief more than excitement.
More relief.
Yeah.
Now I know. Now what I started to do after that is I said, well, what can I do to create opportunities for us to meet now that I know? So that's all I started doing, trying to create opportunities for us to meet again. Does that make sense? Yeah.
To spend time with each other.
To spend time.
Yeah.
So the other person can come to their own conclusions. But if the other person doesn't want to spend any time with you, then you really need to leave them alone. Don't you?
It's sort of, you don't have a rights over the person just because God created you as one soul. Yeah.
But see, now we're getting into a discussion about soulmates and finding them. And to be frank with you, you're not ready for that yet.
We've got to go back.
Right, we've got to go back to the basics and understand the soul first. You understand? We've got to go there. Yeah. So are there any more questions about there? Yep. So let's come forward.
Yeah, I'm quite interested. Like, so the soul gets split. It gets split into two.
A bit closer with the mic, if you can.
Oh, sorry. Is that better?
Yep.
Yep.
But there are a lot of people around that are not your soulmate, but you can still feel really connected with them. So
I would say you could feel connected with every person, but not the same as you feel with your soul, mate.
Yeah, but it can still be quite nice to also be connected to souls that are not your soulmate, right?
Are you talking about a sexual connection?
No, friendship.
Well, that's the big difference. You see, the soulmate connection is a sexual one.
Okay.
All of us are brothers and sisters. But your soulmate is the other half of yourself, a very different person.
Yeah, but you get friends with some people, but you don't get friends with other people.
True,
and that you could say it's even more special because you're not even one soul, but still you can be very close to someone, not sexual, but in friendship.
You can be very close with people, any person, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why God likes that too, right?
Of course.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, God loves.
Why are you worried about that?
Yeah. What is
because there's so much. We talk so much about soulmates, but not so much about friendship. And Well,
can I say this about friendship? Friendship is based on two things. It's based on, firstly, how much love you have for each other. Now, very few people on earth know how to express love or receive it. So that's why when you do have a friend that you eventually have some love for, it's a special thing. But it shouldn't be as special as it actually is, because more of us should be able to experience it than we actually do. So that's first. Secondly, there's a common feeling of goals, of life, of things that you want to experience. You could say there's an attraction, a law of attraction governs, the law of attraction governs what you are passionate about and your friends are passionate about. So an example of that is my closest friends are all passionate about redemption of humanity. That's my closest friends. So in the spirit world and on earth, there's others of the 14 are on earth. My closest friends are the people who were passionate about the redemption of humanity and the sharing of truth with humanity. Now, there's lots of other friends I have, but they're not passionate about that particular thing to the extent that I am. And so we spend less time together. But the friends who are passionate about those things, we spend a lot of time together, right? And that's how it's going to be with your life as well. You're going to have special friends where you're going to end up meeting them and you go, wow, we're passionate about the same things. We like the same things. We want to accomplish the same things. Let's get together and do it together. And let's enjoy each other's company while we're doing it. God wants, though, for all of us to feel like we're friends with everyone.
And no person is more special than the other. Like, even though I might have a friend that I enjoy their company more than I enjoy other people, I don't think that they're more special than you.
No, but sometimes when we talk about soulmates, it feels like everyone is like, all the attention goes to, okay, my soulmate, but then like we...
So you're having a rebellion against soulmates?
No, yeah, maybe a bit. Then it feels like they're well...
Aren't those people allowed to have their feelings? They're just having some feelings and you're feeling a bit frustrated by that.
Yeah, I guess so. Yeah. That the focus not about brothers and sisters anymore, but more about
Your question is dominated by your emotion.
Yeah, maybe.
So you just need to feel about your
You need to
emotion.
feel how you feel about everyone.
Yeah. But can we move on back to the subject?
Yeah. Everyone keeps thinking when you do this, you're talking about soulmates, but you're talking about incarnation, aren't you?
No, I'm trying to describe. See, before you can discover the other half of yourself, you need to discover yourself. And this is what most of you are skipping over, right? When you aim a lot of questions about, where's my soulmate and where do I find my soulmate, you're not understanding that the way you discover your soulmate is by discovering yourself first, right? And being yourself first. That's how you do it. And so when you ask these questions, you're ignoring some fundamental facts about some attributes of the soul that are going to cause an attraction to the other half of the soul anyway. And why are you avoiding the discovery of yourself? Because there's a whole heap of emotions in you don't want to know about, right, that need to be known, need to be understood, right? So this is very important to understand. So we need to focus our attention back on the discussion rather than get sort of waylaid of discovering my soulmate. I need you first to understand how to discover yourself. And we haven't even got to that yet, have we? And we've spent an hour and a half already of today. Can we go, yes? And then Rizzo.
Some children are born with, for example, cerebral palsy, autism, ADHD.
Yep.
Is that also a cause of from the parents' injuries?
Yeah, well, not just the parents. It's the long lineage of injuries of that whole family chain, isn't it? It's not just the parents. What generally happens with regard to what you would call child onset or child born with child, what do they call that? There's natal or prenatal conditions. The main cause of all of that is the fact that there's been emotions not dealt with for centuries that have eventually pinnacled to the point that now the genetic processes and the replication processes in the womb can't work properly. There's also, unfortunately nowadays, the added problem of spirit influence in the womb, where mothers and fathers are becoming very open to the possibility of there being spirits, but unfortunately not open to the development of those spirits. And so those spirits now can also influence the development of the child's body in the womb. So you get these terrible things starting to occur to that next generation because of the build-up of problems that have not been resolved in the family chain. So it's not just mum and dad, it's a whole family chain, grandparents, great-grandparents, and sometimes it goes on for thousands of year chain, that eventually ends up with the pinnacle of the problem being shown as now a genetic disturbance in the next generation, right? Now, that's very unfortunate, but again, completely the result of parents not dealing with their problems. Yep.
Some of the things you mentioned, though, are not genetic. They're just...
autism, for example.
Or ADHD.
ADHD, for
that's
example.
completely the product of the environment that the child...
That's right.
Well, again, that's a...
We can have days of discussion about that.
Yeah, it's a complex issue, but it's not something that you're born with. Yeah.
There are certain things that people say you're born with that you're not, and then there's other things that you are definitely born with and you are, and there's reasons for both.
Yeah.
Yeah. And one day when we want to talk about those particularly, because they are important to talk about, but they're not as important as what we want to talk about today, we can discuss those separately. Yeah. Yep. Next to you, sorry.
Yeah.
And Rizzo, no, you're right.
Is it correct that the parents attract the child, but the child does not attract the parents?
It's correct, more correct that the parents attract the child.
Yeah.
Yes. Of course, they're not often doing it consciously because it's their emotions that attract the child, not and their personality that attracts the child, not a conscious decision on the parent, I want that particular child. Although, that being said, my and Mary's child in the first century when we conceived, I did choose the child.
But you had to be very developed.
You have to be quite developed to do it. But the reality is that I met Luke, the Bible guy you know as Luke, when he was very young. I met him when he was 4 years of age, and I just loved him. I loved his personality. I loved his nature, and I still do, of course. But I just loved a lot of things about him, and I knew that his soulmate hadn't incarnated yet. And so by the time Mary and I got together and we decided we wanted to have children, we talked about, let's try for Sarah, like Luke's soulmate. We knew it would be Luke's soulmate. Yeah. So, and that's what happened. Yeah.
And another question about the gender of the child.
Yep.
Is it more likely to attract a gender you're opposed to or you don't want to have a son, for instance? Or is it more likely the other way?
Well, when you think about it with gender, it's 50% one way or the other, isn't it? And the reality is, well, yes, there are some, some conditions where, for example, a couple might have all male children or all female children, and there's certain reasons why that may occur, which are to do, unfortunately, mostly with injuries, not with pure desires. The reality is, if you were in a pristine state having children, even a six-sphere state, not a celestial state, having children, you could attract whatever gender you wanted and you wouldn't be very selective about it anyway, would you? Because you'd probably want one of each at least and then go from there. But it's the attractions nowadays occur a lot of times because there are many, many generations of injuries that are imposed upon the couple having children. And as a result of that, their attractions are very distorted in terms of out of harmony with love frequently. Yeah.
But so it's possible that injuries influence or not influence, but that the attraction of the gender is influenced by injury?
Yeah, certainly possible. It's highly likely on Earth now, yes. Yeah, and not what God intended, of course, but again, human condition, sin, our human condition, and these, by the way, are all, now we're talking about what are all our creations. Like God designed a system of incarnation and then we distorted it with a whole heap of sin, And then we go, oh, isn't it so unfair that these things happen? I go, well, no, it's not unfair. You created it. Our multi-generational sin on earth, created by humans, creates these distortions in what actually God designed as a pure process, right? And that's what you've got to remember with a lot of these questions. A lot of what you're questioning is distortion, right? And the distortion occurs because the lack of love in accepting and understanding and loving the process. That's where the distortions happen. But let's move on from there, shall we? Yeah, okay. How's toilet going for everyone? We got another half an hour in you? Yeah, okay. Good.
With our Aussie audiences, we have to do on the hour.
Yeah, because they all drink a lot more water.
Yeah.
So basically what we're saying is the three parts of yourself, of which the two bodies are the most insignificant, aren't they? Because your soul is the real you, and these bodies are just like robots that the real you can use, isn't it? One person in Australia said flesh suits. Spiritual flesh suit, physical flesh suit that the soul inhabits, right? And that's pretty accurate. Now, what is the real you? The soul. You're okay with that? That's the real you. Okay. So let's go from there. Can you see that when you, and this was very prevalent yesterday, by the way. Yesterday, I don't know if you noticed, but there were a lot of what I would classify as combative questions, right? And the reason why you get so combative is because you're focusing, remember, your attention on what you can see, hear, taste,
touch,
smell, and feel. Right, feel like sensory. Physical touch. And then what you're doing is, because we're so divorced from what I would classify as our soul senses, you then start processing all of these things with your mind. Now, your mind is a really, really interesting organism. And there's, in the future we'll be saying a lot about it more technically, but for the moment it's very important to understand a few things. Firstly, your mind is a decision-making thing that is based upon many, many inputs. Some of those inputs are physiological, in other words, measuring these things. Some of those inputs are emotional, in other words, they're coming from the soul to the mind as well. And some of the inputs are what I would classify as environmental pressures and considerations, right? And on top of that, there are parts of or systems of your body. So you thinking of these being your senses, but actually, if you're honest with yourself, you can already see that actually they're not the only senses your body has, because you've got your entire nervous system, which is not something you can physically touch, although it is part of, it senses the touch, but it connects organs in your body, to the mind, and allows the mind to control those organs and allows them to physiologically function, right? So you've got this central nervous system, and then you've got your cardiovascular system, right? And then you've got other systems as well, haven't you? If we start listening, then there's also the lymphatic system. Many of you know much about the body? No? So we can list a whole heap of systems, right? It's funny, isn't it? We live in this body for 80 or 90 years and we don't know much about it. But anyway, that's how it is for most of us, isn't it? We go, our body's working pretty good. I don't know much about it. As soon as it's not working good, we go, I need to find out about it. Yeah. But these systems are also sensory in nature, in the sense that we know and can feel when something's going wrong, can't we? So, and you can often see it, you know, if a person's quite ill, you can see something's wrong with them generally. So it's not just what you see, hear, taste and smell and so forth and feel. There's also in this body, there's a whole lot of other systems going on which we perceive as ourselves. This is who we are, right? But divorced of that, there's this whole other area of our existence that very few of us ponder very much about, I've found, particularly while on earth. And that is, very few of us ponder about how do things like emotions work? And how is it that we can feel one type of emotion and define it as fear, and then feel another type of emotion and define it as sadness? Like, isn't that an amazing thing? That there's these sensory things going on that are not seemingly connected with the body. And by the way, they aren't connected with the body because spirits have them as well. And then people who are just without bodies have them too. So they aren't actually connected to the body. But we don't know that at the beginning. There's all these parts of us going on that are not related to what I can see, hear, taste and smell, but the see, hearing, tasting and smelling do have an effect on them. So, you know, if somebody comes along and punches you in the arm, there's not only the feeling of, oh, that hurt, but there's also a feeling of, how dare you offend me? Like, how dare you do these violent things to me that are more emotional in response, isn't there? And so there's these parts of us which most of us have very little understanding or awareness of, but actually they govern our life to a large degree. And it's very much to do with these things: emotions, desires, passions, longings, things like wisdom, practical application of knowledge, love. And you could just go on and on and on with a great big long list of what are seemingly undetermined things that every one of us has a sort of a feeling that, oh, my experience of that is unique. But what if it's not? What if it's all defined by mathematical formulas and all defined by science as to why you have a certain emotional response to something, why you have a certain, like everything else in your body has all these mathematical, physiological functions that all are able to be determined and structurally determined and consistent. So it would also make sense that if we're having these things, there is some kind of linkage with all of that, right? Of course, it's going to make sense that that's true. So the real problem for most of us is when we become this, which we're encouraged to do, and the more educated we are, the more we're encouraged to do it, isn't it? And this is, many of you are like this. You are so mind dominant that you're almost scared of these. You're almost frightened of these, right? And that comes out in your questions a lot, how frightened you are of these, right? But these are tied into your happiness the most. You see, happiness is an emotion, right? And the ability to be happy means you're going to have an ability to feel your emotions. And the more you use your mind to detune from feelings, the more you're detuning from the potential good feelings. So what happens then is you start, your mind becomes this machine, and that's all it really is. The whole aside I just gave is to get back to this mind and go, what is this machine called the mind? And how well does it actually work? Because what I see is it's very illogical. The inputs to the mind are not just what you can see, taste, hear, smell, whatever, which is what most people think are the inputs. The stronger inputs are all the things you emotionally feel. They are stronger inputs. So let's say you have a feeling, I don't want to feel anger. You will tell yourself, I don't want to feel anger, and then your mind will construct a whole paradigm of belief structures so you don't have to feel it. Right? So I see people who are living in their total mind thinking that they're loving, and yet they are sad, angry people, right? Because they've divorced their, what we would call emotional intelligence from their intellectual intelligence. And many of you have done this. It's something you're going to have to reverse if you want to progress, right? In the process of doing that, you have disconnected from what we would classify, and there are other parts of it too, but what we classify as attributes of the soul. These attributes belong in the soul. They don't belong in the body. So while your body has sensory attributes, and by the way, your soul can also see, hear, taste, smell, feel. It also has systems that allow these functionings to occur. And your spirit body too can also see, hear, taste, smell, feel. Because otherwise, imagine you pass over and you can't feel anything, and you can't taste anything. What would your existence be like? Would it be better off not being in existence, wouldn't it? So God's created, so every body has a superset of the prior body in terms of its ability and construct. But the biggest thing that you have the ability to feel everything is your soul, of which, remember, you're only one half. Right? Now, when I become intellectually dominated and I try to reason through all of my problems using my mind, and I use all what I think are logic arguments, but actually are arguments driven by all these unhealed emotions that I have in me that I'm pushing into my mind and coming up with arguments, this mind becomes illogical to the point of useless to us. And its only real function now is you're controlling your physiological functions. Aside from that, it's not benefiting you at all because you're just responding to the demands of the soul in a state of denial, and therefore every question is a working towards denial. Every desire working towards denial. Every desire shut down feelings, shut down sensations. Everything is working towards acknowledging your fears. Right? And this is what's going on for the majority of people, particularly in the West, in Western countries, because we're more educated, you have the opportunity of more education. And as a result of the opportunity of more education, in all education, you're taught to use your mind more and more and more. And the higher the education, the higher you need to use your mind, isn't it? So, you start using your mind, and you've all experienced this at some point. You go to school using your mind. What do they teach you about love? What do they teach you about longing, passion, desire, how to feel your emotions, how to experience your emotion? Can you see? You're not taught about any of that at all. You're not taught how to be a parent. You're not taught how to live a life. Hardly at all. You're just educated in your mind to do things. And there's no focus in education on happiness. Can you remember anybody, like in your childhood, it'd be a rare occasion, right, in your childhood where somebody said, what makes you happy? You're sitting down there in maths class and, when did they teach you about Fibonacci? Which would make you happy, right? Knowing that your body is made the same as a pineapple, as we talked about yesterday. It'd make you happy to know that there's at least some practical application for maths, including how we perceive beauty is a practical application of maths. But that's not taught to us. That's ignored. And the reason why it's ignored is because everybody seems to want to focus on this mind development, thinking that that's the way forward for humanity to progress into a state of love by ignoring the emotions. And my question is, has it worked? Do you think we are now, right now, in the state of human history, we are the most mind dominant of humanity that's ever lived? Do you reckon we're in a good state? It doesn't look too good, does it, the future? Do you think? It's not looking too crash hot. It's you see all these emotions, unloving emotions, being ignored by humanity for the sake of the mind, right? So the net result is, and this is the point I want to make, this thing, which is the real you, your soul, is neglected. And for most of us, it's been neglected all of our life. All of our life, right? And it's been neglected in preference to developing your mind, right? But this mind is just a machine responding to inputs. And many of your inputs are denial of these. And so this mind is going to become a machine that is not working very well or working very logically, because there's all these emotional reasons why it can't work logically. It's feeling them and going, I need to respond to what I deny. I need to respond what I want to keep away from myself. So you can see with these qualities, which are all lovely, there are some sort of opposites, aren't there? Right? Happiness.
Sadness.
Sad, Emotion. Stoic.
Yep, that's right.
Desires.
Apathy.
Apathy.
Like Michael said, just tuning out of life, give up on life.
Passion. Similar, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wisdom.
See my logical confusion.
It's stupid. A lot of times we want to be stupid. Yeah? Like an example of that is, I know smoking's bad for me, but I keep doing it. That's just stupid. Isn't it? If you know something's bad for you and you keep doing it, isn't that stupid? But oftentimes we want to be stupid because there's emotional reasons we're denying as to why we want that. So the smoker's denying, he might have a whole lot of sadness he's covering over by his emotion, and so he wants to deny that sadness. So a substance like smoking helps me do that. It distracts me from my sadness. So if I smoke, and so now I'm stupid, but I think I'm doing a good thing because it's helping me to avoid dealing with some other things, right? Love?
Hatred.
Yeah, and a lot of the world is in a state of hate. They hate this, they hate that, they hate on people, they hate on, you get attacked all the time. Even if you talk about love, you get attacked all the time. It's like, why is that? It's because what finishes up happening is we think in our mind we're being logical by being apathetic. We think we're being logical by being stoic. We think we're being logical by avoiding the experience of sadness. We think we're being wise when we're actually often being stupid. And we often hate things. We avoid them, we dislike them, when actually we should embrace them. An example of that is taking action in your life. Most people hate doing it, when it's going to challenge or change in their life, and yet it's something they should do. They should love change, but we hate change. It doesn't make any sense. Like, change is necessary for our world and my personal life to get better. I need to change. So it makes no sense to hate change. But here I am with my mind saying, change is bad, change is bad. This mind, not clever, not clever. Stop thinking it's clever. It's not clever. Yep.
Yeah, can I add? That's yesterday, one of your key questions really from everyone was, how do I practically apply God's truth? And then we started to have a discussion, but what Jesus and I felt was, now we're interfacing with everyone's mind. And there's all this sort of denial of what's feeding the mind, if you like. And so this is really, in a way, isn't it, Dylan, you answering that question. This is how to practically apply it, is to break down your reasoning in your mind to see that it's driven by a lot of these things, and that is what is limiting you when you go, how do I apply this divine truth to my life? A lot of it is because that you're still trying to convince your mind that's got all this faulty reasoning because it's trying to suppress all this emotion, and then you get lost, or you feel, I don't know, it's too hard, or this, I'm not getting anywhere, I can't feel anything. But often it's because there's this sort of glorification of the mind, if we put it in an extreme way, that is causing us to, we're now started to turn our mind sort of on ourselves to deny what's happening.
Yeah, and unfortunately, the mind that we're using doesn't even exist in the soul.
Yeah.
It exists in our spirit body. So it's actually the mind, this mind is actually an attribute of our spirit form, not of our soul. The soul's mind is its emotions. And so what we're doing is by using this, we are detuning our entire life from our soul. That's what we end up doing. And this is why we become so disconnected that we're willing to fight and argue and even kill and murder and even rape and pillage, and we're even able to steal, and we're able to kill 250 million children a year without much of a thought about it. Because we're so in our mind that very few of us feel about it. Right? And if we do feel about it, we don't like those feelings. So we want to stop them.
Yeah. And
so we try to use our mind to stop them.
To reason out of them.
To reason ourselves away from them.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so the biggest problem we actually face is that we do not understand the attributes of the soul. That's a big problem for our life. And we can talk, so remember yesterday, one of the questions was, how do we practically apply divine truth in our lives? Well, the very first thing you really need to start doing is understand you're a soul, not bodies, and your mind is useless.
And
right? And the majority of people go, oh, that's not true. How can that be true? And the more intellectual I am, the more I'm going, oh, that's definitely not true. But trust me, when you change from having intelligence intellectually to having intelligence emotionally, your entire life will change. All right? Also, I must point out, your mind is incapable of prayer because it doesn't exist in the soul, and God's interface with you, remember we pointed that out yesterday, God's interface with you is soul to soul. It bypasses your mind. Your mind is useless in your relationship with God. This is why most people struggle with a relationship with God, because their mind is pretty much dysfunctional, for the most part, illogically dysfunctional. But on top of that, it's not belonging to the soul. So every time you try with your mind to think of God or try with your mind to have a relationship with God, it's not going to work. God's designed it that it doesn't work because God wants a relationship with the real you, which God knows He designed these bodies to be discarded, right? The physical body, you're going to discard it. Like if if you live 100 years on earth, it will be pretty amazing probably. So whatever age you are now, take the 100. That's how much you got left pretty much, isn't it? And 100, take that. And then you're gone. That body's gone. It's not only just gone, it's not you, because it's going to end up in the ground feeding some worms and some trees. That's where it's going to end up, right? It's not you. That's where it is. And God designed it to just be manure. After a certain period of time, you live on earth. And in the spirit world, the spirit body lasts a lot longer, of course. So there are some spirits I know, like I said, 150,000 years old, but that doesn't mean that body might not just go at some point in the future. We don't know at this stage how long that body might survive, but all indications are, if things don't change in terms of growth, that they are decaying. So you see a tree, when it dies and it stops growing and it dies, from then on it's getting destroyed, isn't it? Turned into something that's more useful. Right? Same with your bodies. That's the purpose of them. So these are just like suits that you're temporarily using so that this can develop in your future. The soul can develop in your future. Yeah? So, else?
How does your spirit body go to soul? If that makes sense.
How does it connect to it?
Yeah.
Yep. Well, between these bodies, and I've talked about this before, but between these bodies, there's cords. The connection between your physical body and your spirit one is a cord that goes from the base of your skull to the base of your spine, right? And if you're a spirit, you could see it. It's a silver in colour, and so it's called silver cord. It's true that all of your physiological functions in your physical body are passed into the spirit body, right? Now, there is also a cord that connects the soul with the spirit body. And it's very similar in design. It's, again, from the base of the skull to the base of the spine. And it connects all of the physiological functions of that body to the soul. So that when this body tastes something, the soul can identify the taste, right? When the body sees something, the soul can identify and work out what you can see, and so forth. So these connection points are there like for everybody, and they remain until the body disappears. So when that body disappears, so does the cord die.
But like, how does the spirit body disappear?
Well, nobody really knows yet, because nobody in the 150,000 years that I've talked to people that's the oldest people I've talked to, none of them have seen a spirit body die. So the answer to that question is unknown. But I have killed off my own bodies, right, that I've made. So Mary and I make bodies in the spirit world to talk to people, and then we
disintegrate
them because they're not necessary for our life. So we do that a lot. And so you can actually make a body and then make it disintegrate. But the body that I had in the 1st century, I can't make it disintegrate, interestingly enough. So there must be something in that, but I don't know what that is yet. The body I had in the 1st century, the very first spirit body that I had, is still connected to my soul, like this one is. Yeah. Yeah, I have 2 connected to the soul, yeah. 4, actually. Because Mary's got 2 as well. Yeah.
One soul.
Now we're starting again.
Yeah, no, like we need to go. You guys, like the mind, disintegrate the mind.
See, the trouble is that this is the beautiful thing about divine truth, right? It's so fascinating. Yeah? And the problem with it being so fascinating is that we can go on merry-go-rounds, if we're not careful, where we start off on a subject and before we know it, we're over here on a completely different subject and forgotten some fundamentals.
And really, this is us trying to help to
with
start
some fundamentals.
to answer the question of how do I practically apply God's truth to my life.
Which is what we want to focus on after
a
our break.
lot of us try when we hear divine truth, we're so mind dominant, and then we try to be humble in our mind or try to process emotions or try to pray from our mind, and we don't realize what we're doing. And it's becoming sensitive to this other process that we're trying to help you do today.
Yeah. So,
Michael.
In this picture you're drawing here, the mind is following the instructions of the soul. Yeah.
Yes and no, isn't it? Yeah.
It is primarily following the instructions of the soul, but its actual role is also physiological in nature. So not only is it following the instructions of the soul, it's actually feeling the different systems in each body and controlling them as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. So because so basically they're not independent of each other, these systems, are they? You can think of it, your cardiovascular system is not really independent of your nervous system, it's not independent of your feeling system, and it's not independent of your senses, because all of them are required in order to have your senses. So they're all very integrated into each other. But the problem is we're starting to use our mind as a decision point, right?
Almost
for conscious choice, rather than just allowing it to be used for the physiological control of everything. We're now using it and trying to use it to dominate our soul, our emotional state.
Which is kind of what our souls are wanting to do at the moment, but then we're kind of denying that that's even happening.
Yeah, when you use the word we there, what do you mean?
All of us.
No, I mean, like, say I'm doing that.
Yeah,
right?
yes.
I'm doing it.
Yeah.
But can my mind do that independent of my soul's choice? It feels like the mind is not dysfunctional. It's perfectly functioning relative to what my soul is telling it to do.
Very
correct.
True. Very true.
So my soul is saying, I want to avoid sadness. So mind says, I'll help you do that.
You don't even have any sadness.
The dysfunction is in the soul, not
correct.
The mind is functioning perfectly.
Yes. That's right. But you got to also remember that this mind is something that eventually you'll have to learn to give up altogether.
Again, though, who? Well, like my soul has to.
Your soul will need to
choice.
learn.
It's not the mind that's going to give itself up.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah. Okay. That process happens in the seventh sphere. In the seventh sphere, the reason why a lot of spirits stay there for quite some time is because they learn up until the seventh sphere. Many of them are using their mind to progress, using their, trying to progress, using decisions and that they're making all in their mind, not with their feelings. And so by the time they get to the seventh sphere, if they start receiving God's love, the transition between the seventh and the eighth sphere is giving up that mind, because there is everything above the eighth sphere you will never be able to understand with your mind. You need your feelings to understand them. You won't be able to. In fact, you would be very uncomfortable in the eighth sphere if you continue to use your mind. Does that make sense? Because you'd be totally confused in your mind almost all the time.
You'd be mind blown.
So it's sort of like
fuse blown out. Yeah.
So if you could be put there right now, you would feel like absolutely like you'd be so confused that you'd almost go crazy with the confusion. Does that make sense to you? Because the mind becomes so, I can't understand this, I can't understand that, I can't get that, I don't know that, how does that work? And of course, because there's no emotional resolution, the mind just goes, well, and you end up, that's what you would end up doing. And that's why nobody who's ever in the eighth sphere is in that state, because you can't get there with the mind in that state. So that has to be done in the seventh sphere. You have to give up your mind. Now, my suggestion to you is to start giving it up now. Don't wait. Like, you don't want to go progress all the way to the seventh sphere and then go,
oops, I forgot that.
Now I've got to give up this thing that I thought got me here. Yeah. You can't even get to the seventh sphere with just your mind.
No.
But seventh sphere is all about giving up your mind. But what I'm recommending to you guys is what we're noticing yesterday and today as well, there is a very large focus on what you understand intellectually. But there is very little understanding from an emotional perspective as to what to do. Emotions are more rapid. They are faster. Your mind has limitations. In fact, your mind is only capable of working at the speed of the synapses and everything that occur in the spirit body's brain, and their maximum speed is the speed of light. That's it. Emotions can work faster than the speed of light. Yeah. And this is why God uses emotions to communicate, because they can exit the boundaries of the universe. You see, God created it so, and this is technical, I know, but it's worth understanding if you want to sort of get it from a sort of a technical perspective. You got God's soul, right? God wants to communicate with your soul. At the beginning, it's a half of the soul. He wants to communicate with your soul. He lives outside of the universe. You're in the universe. How does he get communication from him to you? He can't use anything in the universe to communicate to you, because it's all substance, it's all matter, it's all controlled by limitations, laws. The only thing that's not is substances that God has. So the only way he can start really communicating with you properly is by you receiving some substances directly from him in order for the communication to occur. That's what the love is, right? And so from a technical perspective, unless you receive the love to your soul, communication with God via the love feelings is impossible. Now, God's also created one other mechanism in your soul that is not bound by physical limitation, besides love mechanism, the reception of love, and that's the conscience. There's a mechanism that he can influence your intellect with, but actually it's via the control of the soul. So again, if your soul's closed down, it's not going to work. There's you could say, this is how I likened it to some of our friends in Australia. I said, it's like your soul has a few little nodules, one of which allows connection with love, and one of which allows connection with truth.
Little portals.
They're portals into your soul. They're actual physical portals coming from outside of the universe to your soul. They are the two mechanisms via which God communicates, and they are only in your soul. The bodies don't have them, and so therefore the bodies can't be used for that purpose. Make sense? Comment? Just here.
So when someone is talking about a gut feeling, where is that located?
Yeah, see, it's interesting when people say gut feelings, whatever. Well, it's interesting where they come from. Now, some of them can come from your soul. But also you've got to remember that your soul is able to connect to other people's souls. So it could also come from like a spirit who also has a gut feeling and is trying to give you a feeling, right? So we're not independent creatures in the sense that we can't communicate with each other. We are able to communicate, but not just on an intellectual level. We can connect soul to soul. So Mary and my combined soul has the ability to connect to you and whoever your soulmate is, combined soul. And we're able to transmit feelings to you, and you're able to transmit feelings to us, and you're also able to transmit thoughts via the mind to us. And in the spirit world, you sort of receive them as packages sitting above the mind of the individual to receive. And you can have thousands of them, like from all different people, friends, whatever. So let's say I live in, AlphaTauri or whatever. I'm in a place in the spirit world like thousands of light years away, and you want to have a chat with me. Well, you just send me one of these packets, right? And that packet, depending on your development, will arrive one or two ways. If it's if your development is under the sixth sphere, it's going to be an intellectual packet that takes the speed of light to arrive, which means if the person's a long way away, it's going to take a while to get there. Or if your development is higher than that, it takes no time to arrive. It's not bound by time. So you have the thought transmitted to me, I receive it straight away, and I go, oh, I'll go and see you. And we can meet up wherever, and we can tee all that up without needing to see each other. Yeah? Now, that ability is in all of you still, but these are part of the soul and spirit body's abilities that most of us are in complete denial of. And we don't use them. But we could develop them. Yeah?
So when you talk about my conscience, in terms of the thing that helps me decide between right and wrong,
yes,
is that in the soul or is that in the spirit body?
It's in soul.
Conscience.
Yeah. Yeah. The conscience is a mechanism that actually isn't yours. It's an interface between yours and God's moral truth. So it's interface between you and God's soul. So it's not just yours. It belongs to you and God together. God uses it all the time. And this is something we want to talk about this afternoon. Because without understanding that, the majority of us go, well, how do I work out what is true and what is not true? You know? Well, you can have God telling you what is true, easy enough. But remember I said it's governed by emotions that affect the way the soul operates. So the more unhealed or unloving emotions I have in me, the more restriction I have with my connection between myself and God with regard to the conscience. So when God tries to say to me, actually, that thing you're doing there, that's not very good for you, I'm going, no, it's good for me because my addiction tells me it's good for me. So I'm ignoring the connection. And this is why we need to understand more the emotions in our soul and you could say the attributes of the soul. Then we need to focus more on those attributes, the conscience and those other attributes, than we do on the development of our mind. Yeah. Riza?
Can we be resistant or stuck without it being the mind that's doing it?
Well, no. Remember, as we pointed out earlier, all resistance comes from the opposite feelings as to what we eventually want to feel. So
the loving expression of our soul.
Yeah.
The opposite of that, all the
of
sin,
the
if you like,
unloving expression of our soul is what creates resistance in the mind.
The mind is just a tool. So it's like any tool. You can use it to your benefit or you can use it to your detriment.
But the root of it is from the soul.
The motivation to use it to your detriment comes from your soul.
So to undo the paradigm of the mind
being dominant and stoic and
you need to undoing the mind.
Really, we're just trying to explain the mind because we feel a lot of mind dominance here. But humility is always the answer.
Yeah. And we in the afternoon conversation with you, what we need to do is now start to look at how this all works practically.
Yeah, we'll get to some questions.
But we needed to discuss the theory with you because if you don't understand how ineffectual your mind is, you're going to keep living in it and you're actually going to try to apply principles of divine truth using your mind.
Okay.
Which actually won't work at all. And you won't find any progress in that regard.
And by mind, it's like your thoughts, your intellect, these kind of non-feeling place that.
I'm just, I guess it's being driven by an emotion, and for me, a lot of people say sometimes you're thinking too much.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I feel like my mind system has gotten me, or my soul as well, has gotten me to a point where my mind's not even working that well anymore, and or there's so much resistance or something that
in your case, Rizzo, the mind and the soul aren't working very well.
Yeah.
Yep. And this is where most people are. You know, most people we meet are at that place where their mind isn't working very well. They think it's working well, but it's not working very well. Sometimes they're more conscious that it's not working very well, but they don't know why. But for the most part, the soul-based functionality is completely misunderstood or not known at all. And so we need to, this afternoon, focus a bit more on how can I connect to the soul more? What practical things can I do to begin to engage the soul more and focus more on my feelings than my thoughts, right? Because if we don't do this, then prayer, remember, this is all about connection with God. We raised this yesterday. We want to help you have a relationship with God because of the benefits of that relationship. And the thing that we need in that relationship is to be able to pray. But the prayer comes from your soul. And if you're not connected to your soul, how do you pray? You can't pray without your soul. So we need to understand what part of me is my soul and how do I feel that part of me? How do I connect to that part of me? That makes sense? If we can do that, then we can pray. Then I've got the capacity of receiving love. Then the benefits of that love will start flowing and then things will change in my life. And then I can use my mind in a more wise manner because instead of it responding to the denial that's in my soul, all the things I don't want to know about, it's responding in a completely different way. It wants to discover. It wants to know. It wants to understand what's going on in my soul.
It wants to accept its own limitations and say, there's some things that I just need to feel before I'll intellectually understand. Yeah.
Yep. So what we're trying to do is say to you, look, this mind has got its problems. It's not a bad design. It's just what we've done with it. We've made it so governing and so centric to our existence that we've neglected the very thing that we are, which is our soul. This is what we really are. These things, including this mind, is all eventually going to disappear from your life, you know? And whenever you connect to a body like I am with this one, you're just going to use the mind to express how you feel all the time. That's its only purpose. Besides the physiological functioning of my body, it's its only role, to express what my soul feels. And once you understand that it's my soul that is going to be developed, it's my soul, not my intellect, that's going to know, then you can sort of change tack in terms of your development spiritually. But until that occurs, you're not going to develop spiritually towards God. You're only going to develop in your morality, and that's the only way you'll develop. Now, I think it's time for us to have a break, isn't it? Yeah.